Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Alf Turner, and I'm a member of the Yorta Yorta people. I've been that for a number of years now, and I've come along tonight to welcome you to this function. So welcome everybody to the traditional lands of the Yorta Yorta, and I hope you enjoy the night tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it is a great honour to be here on Yorta Yorta country. Tonight's discussion will consider the Goulburn Valley's relative success at receiving and accommodating large numbers of immigrants from different ethnic origins over a long period, as well as being home to Victoria's largest Indigenous population outside of Melbourne. As well as that, 10 years ago, La Trobe hosted the first multicultural conference here in Shepparton back in 2007, and today we mark the anniversary of that event with another conference called Looking Back, Looking Forward. It was held today at University's Shepparton campus, and for those of you who've come from that event to this evening, I welcome you here as well. The different groups and subsequent emerging communities here in the Goulburn Valley represent diversity not only in nationality, culture and circumstance, but also in the ways that their migration has occurred. Earlier waves of immigrants who came were mostly self-driven in response to what we call push or pull factors, so maybe war in their homeland or the opportunity of jobs here in Australia. But in recent years, we've also seen here the arrival of many refugees and asylum seekers. So the region is home to a diversity of cultures and communities. And it's partly for this reason that in 2015, the Victorian Multicultural Commission approached the university and asked if we would be part of a report on social cohesion in Shepparton, and then they added Mildura as well. And Anthony Moran, who's one of our guests here tonight, one of our speakers, was the co-author of the resulting report, Social Cohesion in Shepparton and Mildura. So for tonight's panel, we have Dr. Anthony Moran, who's a senior lecturer in sociology in the Department of Social Inquiry at La Trobe. He's also a Shepparton boy, so he's at home here. He teaches and researches in the areas of race, ethnicity, nationalism, multiculturalism, cosmopolitanism, and Indigenous settler politics and relations. Joining Anthony from La Trobe is Dr. Julie Andrews, who's also well known in Shepparton and has spent many years here. She's a member of the Doolan family clan and the Briggs family of the Yorta Yorta tribe, and since 2015 has been the coordinator of Aboriginal Studies at La Trobe. She designs and teaches on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues in Melbourne and in Northern Victoria, and in particular her On Country subject, which is taught here in Shepparton, has won numerous awards for educational experience. Maybe some of you here have partaken of that subject. Her research has produced a body of knowledge in the areas of Aboriginal narratives, identity, Aboriginal demography and mobility, cultural resistance and community development and maintenance. She's been a cultural broker and advisor in partnerships and projects on Aboriginal education, the arts, sport, employment, business, community development, family and welfare. She's a member of the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Advisory Committee for the Museums Board of Victoria and an active member of the Melbourne Aboriginal community. And before you all arrived, Julie and Anthony were reminiscing about dancing up on this stage as primary school students. We also welcome our third panellist from a La Trobe alumnus, Kon Karapanagiotidis. Sorry, I practiced this and now I've stumbled over it. Karapanagiotidis, who is the CEO of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. Kon K, as he's otherwise known, has been a human rights advocate for the past 25 years. As a lawyer, social worker and teacher, Kon has worked at the coalface with communities experiencing inequality and oppression. So from people seeking asylum to Indigenous Australians, survivors of sexual abuse to the homeless. At the young age of 28, Kon founded the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, or the ASRC as it's commonly known. He established it in the space of just 8 weeks as a class project while working as a teacher. The ASRC has now gone on to become Australia's largest organisation helping people seeking asylum. Over 12,000 people have now been helped via a team of 1,200 volunteers and 80 staff who deliver 30 life-changing programs, all without a cent of federal government funding. Thank you, Kon, for all the work that you do through the ASRC. Our final panellist is Shepparton local and refugee advocate Fatima Al-Qarakchy. Fatima arrived in Shepparton from Iraq just 1 week after 9/11. After 3 months, she joined the staff at Maguire College and Wilmot Road Primary School as a teacher's aide, soon supporting students in her fields of maths and science. The following year, Fatima qualified as an English-Arabic interpreter, one of only 2 women in the cohort of 19. Since 2004, Fatima has worked as Kildonan Settlement Services worker, assisting arrivals who have been in Australia between 6 months and 5 years. She's working to close the gap between English and non-English speaking people. In addition to all the work she does in that capacity, Fatima acts as an informal advocate and mentor for Shepparton's Iraqi community and offers support to families experiencing domestic violence. She holds a Bachelor in Biology and a Master's in Microbiology from Mosul University in Iraq, and a Diploma of Interpreting and Diploma of Community Services gained here in Australia. So I'd now like to hand over to tonight's host and broadcaster, journalist, writer, Frances Leach, and the panel. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, Professor Holmes, for that introduction, and it's my great pleasure and honour and privilege to be with you tonight on this stage with our esteemed panel, who have got much to offer in terms of insight and the conversation we're about to have. But we need to start somewhere, so I thought I'd start with you, Anthony, and just talk about the history of Shepparton's unique diversity. You've done a lot of research around that, so where do we trace its origins to?
Well, I think, apart from the Indigenous population of the area, Shepparton's, obviously, it's built on migration. And that goes back a long way. Katie already mentioned it, the history of the earlier British, European migrations, and quite early on, those migrations being quite diverse. And I think that's been one of the really important things about Shepparton. I mean, I think a lot of people in this room would know that there is a kind of carried history of living with difference, different kinds of difference across the years, but there are certain capacities, I think, that have been learnt through that. And as newer migrations have come in more the last 20 years, I think that Shepparton has been able to, it's been pretty good at welcoming those different groups. I mean, I know that there are issues and there are problems, but I think that Shepparton has done a pretty good job of accommodating people from all sorts of different backgrounds.
How do you understand why Shepparton's early migratory patterns had a greater level of diversity and consistent diversity to, say, other towns and other regions in Victoria and elsewhere?
I mean, I think that the agricultural and horticultural industries obviously were a major player in that, and people came to Shepparton because of those industries and the capacity to buy land and to set up, families to set up from, not only British, but Italian and Greek and Albanian backgrounds and so on, and later Turkish backgrounds. I think that's the big story that is still the case. I mean, people are still coming for those reasons.
Julie, the Indigenous history is very rich, and the continuity of that is very important. So how do we understand that, why Shepparton has maybe a stronger sense of continuity in the wider community with its Indigenous history, and how it's thrived where other communities might have really struggled?
Well, one of those cultural groups that Anthony didn't mention was the South Sea Islanders. that travelled from Mackay down to Shepparton for the fruit season, and they were actually seasonal workers too, as well as the Aboriginal community. So this connection of seasonal workers with the Indigenous community is part of our history. So once the sugarcane season was finished in Mackay, the men would jump in the car and drive straight down to Shepparton, and they arrived ready to start picking the fruit. So this Indigenous connection with other Indigenous groups goes back to probably the 1950s. But yeah, I think a lot of the Aboriginal community in Shepparton is a welcoming community, and they immerse that actual, connection within their family as well.
And do they recognise that, say, for instance, the example you gave us there, the seasonal nature of that work as being something that they're familiar with within their own cultures?
Yes, well, we go back to the shearing seasonal work, droving, all that, gillaroos, jackaroos. The women were driving with the men, rounding up sheep on horseback, all that kind of stuff. So this, employment of seasonal work is all across Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia. So there's a big connection of, knowing who's who and where the runs are for work. And a lot of Aboriginal men would go back to the same farmers and, to continue their work every season.
And because of that continuity of that industry, which has had its ups and downs, and it's been in the news in recent years as well. But that's a thread that runs through the history of that as well. It's been there for long. The world's changed a lot, but those industries, those opportunities, have pretty much remained available for people.
Yes, and there was a survey done, a research study done in 2006 by the Fairley Foundation that looked at the change that was going on in Shepparton around the seasonal work, particularly relating to agricultural industry. Now, that was changing due to climate change, but also the financial global crisis that goes, So what happens here in Shepparton is something around the world will impact here on Shepparton as well. So we're not just this little kind of fruit salad bowl on its own. It's connected to the world. And I see with that study that was done in 2006 that there was a big shift from the seasonal employment going to a service delivery of teaching, nursing and welfare.
Fatima, tell me about the Shepparton you encountered when you first came here. What were your early impressions?
Well, at the beginning when I came, actually, it's a big difference. It's between, what it was 14 years and what it is now. And I would like to add what's the other, it's the agriculture, but I'm talking about my people or the people who they came from different background. They are coming to Shepparton because Shepparton, it's a small area and it's a good area to start your life. Especially for people, I'm talking about new arrival, who they don't have enough understanding about, not just the language, but as well as the Isturanian culture. And I believe Shepparton, it's get more understanding for a new arrival, and they are getting a lot of support here. So it's a big difference between when I came and now, and there is a lot of support and a lot of service providers who they can support these people to stay here in Shepparton.
And you've been part of building that, but when you arrived, did you have a sense that you were welcome, that you belonged? Or how long did that take for you to feel that this was home?
6 months.
It's not very long. It's pretty quick,
well,
really, isn't it?
Honestly, yeah. It's not easy when you are starting a new life, as I said, a new language. Maybe because I had some English language before I came. Yes, my accent wasn't really good, and I did learn a lot, and I studied a lot until when I start able to communicate with people. And, well, some people it takes a long time, not because, which is always we try to find an excuse is the culture, or which is something is incorrect. But because, as I said, there is a lot of barriers, like language is number one. It is number one for people. But to integrate with the community, I think it takes a long time. It's not easy. I am talking about people in my age, but not talking with the young or people who are starting, like primary or secondary school, they are easy to get through with the community, too easy for them.
Which is great news, Kon, because they're the sort of positive stories that I guess the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre wants to bring to the wider world to show that there's a fantastic upside to having new arrivals within the community.
Look, I think the important conversation is one of the profound contribution, of course, first of the fact that we're connected and part of the oldest living culture on earth in Indigenous culture, and the most sophisticated culture on earth in our own Indigenous culture here. But multiculturalism, along with our Indigenous First Nations people, have created this extraordinary country. And the burden and threat is imaginary when it comes to the way we talk about refugees. The reality is you're going to find no more resilient, entrepreneurial, hardworking people who contribute to our country. So the conversation has been hijacked by failed leadership, by morally bankrupt politicians who seek to make capital out of the human suffering and struggle of refugees. But when you actually hear the stories, like the story of Fatima, you actually see the stories of leaders, of people who love their families like we do, who care about their country, who bring the best of themselves to this country, who share our values. And that's the story we need to keep telling, is the story that our diversity and our multiculturalism is the strength of this nation. And it's more important than ever at a time where we've got leadership that won't recognise and provide treaty to First Nations people, and at the same time is attacking our multiculturalism. We need to defend our cultures. We need to defend our traditions. We need to defend our communities, because we have this extraordinary story to tell. And that's the story that we're not being told. We're being told a story of fear, of burden, of wanting to distrust the other, rather than actually celebrating the diversity that you see right here. And look around you. Every single one of you, unless you're an Indigenous to this land, came here, or your ancestors came here seeking a better life. And the only difference with refugees is they've also come seeking to save their lives.
I'm really fascinated in the idea of social cohesion and maintaining it, because for all the great things we've talked about how Shepparton has created an environment for that, it can be lost very easily. It isn't something you can take for granted. It's something you need to work at, but we need to define our terms. I mean, Anthony, what would be, if you had to write a mission statement for social cohesion, you stuck it on the wall and said, we need to try to every day get up and live the values that it held, what would it say?
I mean, I think it's quite similar to that notion of social inclusion that people might know, which is a pretty broad-ranging idea of full participation. People having the capacity, the opportunity to participate in a society, and that means all sorts of things. It means work, crucially. It means feeling comfortable in public spaces, feeling like your culture is respected. All of those sorts of things, and it can even go up to feeling like you've got some sort of political say in your community. And I think that there's a lot of work that goes into maintaining that kind of social cohesion.
It doesn't just happen on its own.
No, and I think there's been a lot of work in Shepparton from a lot of people who have been committed to making Shepparton a welcoming and a good place to live. And that's from all sorts of backgrounds, from older established communities, from Indigenous communities, from newer migrant communities. The leadership in all of those groups have been really important, I think. And also the agencies like the police, the schools, the welfare agencies, the ethnic council, the ethnic associations, all of those sorts of organisations are really vital.
So you're saying there, in a way, that everyone has a shared goal, an agreed goal, in terms of the social cohesion that they would like to see in the community?
Well, I think most people want to live in a good community. I mean, there are people that probably are antagonistic, but I think most people want to live in a place that is a good place to live, and they want to make it that way. And I think smaller places, regional cities, I guess people can have a stronger sense of being in a community, like that there's some kind of boundary around it.
I have to say it. I mean, we, as Professor Holmes said earlier, our first forum this year was in Bendigo, and dealing with a similar issue, and the contrast was stark. I mean, they didn't have a same necessarily the same vision or the same sense of purpose, Kon, in relation to how they dealt with cultural diversity and sharing the public space and public forums and tolerating and being inquisitive about other cultures. And that's not that far away from here.
But I think we need to shift away, and I'm conscious not just too many men talking here, but we just need to shift away from the idea of tolerate, the idea that we tolerate our diversity and difference. We need to keep facing into the thing that we keep not talking about, which is whiteness, white privilege, systemic racism, and the way in which that has caused profound harm to Indigenous Australians and causes profound harm to refugees and immigrants still in this country. Most Australians are decent and good, but racism remains a real issue in this country. And when we're looking at that, we keep talking about, for example, how do refugees learn to fit in and we learn to tolerate them, rather than how do we actually tackle prejudice, bigotry, and privilege that assumes that somehow my life as a white male is more important than Julie's life or Fatima's life, both as a man and as a white man. So I think there's some major issues there around the privilege of men and the privilege of white people, and we need to be tackling that, because successful communities like Shepparton are ones where you're actually seeing the value of us as human beings. We shared values, we shared purpose, we shared love, and we see each other as human beings. It's not complicated, but we need to keep modelling and championing that and calling it out. Said enough.
Julie, the Indigenous community does have a strong voice in this community, and you know, the intersection of European culture, Indigenous culture, and then new arrival cultures from around the world. But it could have been easily the situation where Indigenous people who have historically and systemically been, been treated appallingly in this country in terms of access to resources and justice could have felt left out once again. So how did the Indigenous communities in this area get to a place where it felt that it had a stake in also allowing other people to be part of that story before it even had justice of its own?
Good question. You can't not look at the Aboriginal historical connection to Aboriginal missions. And we have to go and look at Karapanagiotidis, which turned out the biggest political freedom fighters in this country. And this is how Aboriginal people retained their identity, their community togetherness, but a shared will to advance their people. And the suffering that they had to experience by living on the flats between Shepparton and Marupna, that kind of instilled, this resistance in their ability to assimilate. They didn't lose their identity. They were proud people. They were proud on the mission and they were proud off the mission. And they experienced such racism once they moved off the mission in terms of housing, employment and education, all the strains that people need to advance their families. An Aboriginal community, as you may or may not know, have a strong kinship. And a lot of the Yorta Yorta people were all very connected to each other. So this historical way of looking back in order to go forward is embedded within the Yorta Yorta people here. So when
the threat of leadership as well, and
absolutely.
Responsibility.
When our leaders left Karapanagiotidis, they either went here or they went to Melbourne. They never lost their connection. They were sending up things all the time through, networks, political activism, developing, representing themselves to the government. It was self-determination and community development. And those ideals are important to Aboriginal people here in Shepparton, and they've retained that. It's become part of their historical foundation when they are working towards advancing their community. And they can see the hardship that other cultural groups have come from, and they have an understanding.
So that empathy is crucial.
And empathy, yeah, because they've got it, their families are suffering as well. They've come from suffering on their country, all that kind of thing, and we're the same. We've got a lot of unfinished business here as Aboriginal people, And you can talk about the treaty, but there's also deaths in custody, there's, harassment, there's still racism, like you said. We've got a multitude of issues that we have to deal with every day, and to get our young people educated so they can get a good job. These are the things that we struggle as a community in the face of, drug and alcohol addiction and all that kind of stuff. Our struggles are similar to others, but we've got a lot of understanding for other people and cultures too. And we respect other cultures as well.
Fatima, it's interesting, Julie talked about leadership, and communities that come as refugee communities often have broken models of leadership because families have been separated, intergenerational loss of life because of war, and also people presenting in their new country of arrival with the wounds of war, whether they're psychological or emotional. Very hard to be a leader if you're not a whole person. So how has your community and other communities here who are immigrant communities found a way to tap into a leadership that allows you to integrate with the wider community?
Well, as you mentioned before, it's a lot of people who they came to this country, they are looking for peace. And they suffered a lot. I think some of them until now, if not themselves, their families, still they are suffering there. And to be part of the community and to be leader or to be part of this life, you have not, I'm not saying we have to forget, but I have to establish a new life. I have to start a new life. I have to think about, a new generation, which is our children. If we keep thinking about the past, we will not able to achieve anything. So this is the main things we have to put it in our mind. And you can see a lot of people actually, they establish really perfect life, like very famous doctors. And there is a lot of, political people who they establish their lives there. But it is very hard to make the leadership. It's not easy, and you have to make for yourself a new culture. Honestly, it should be between the Australian culture and your own culture to be part of this community as well as part of the Australian community.
With that though, I mean, I guess in other parts of Australia, expression of culture can be seen as a threat. We've seen examples where, say, the building of mosques has been controversial or has been resisted. So why has Shepparton been, I think there are 5 mosques in the region, in the greater, why has it been able to have a much more welcoming approach to people's difference in religious practice, do you think?
Maybe because you've got a perfect leaders here in Shepparton, or because, well, I think Shepparton is really a very good place, and honestly, they are getting more understanding about the culture and as well as about religion. Yes, there is about 5 mosques, and we are able to practice our culture, our traditional in any time. And as I said, Shepparton people, I think, they are getting more understanding about us, and that's why we've been asking a lot of questions. Not because it's their curiosity, but actually they want to get understand. I've been asking 100 times why you are covering yourself. Are you wearing a scarf at home? All these questions, some people maybe they are not accepted that, but for me, I accepted that because they need to get more understanding. They need to be very close to us.
Do you feel that that's a breakthrough if they ask you? They actually feel that they can ask you, if people approach you, that for the most part it's their curiosity wanting to know rather than questioning your choice?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. They need to understand. They need to get a more understanding. And as I said before, and I said for many times, the people who they are not able to answer the question, or the people they don't have enough English language, the basic way for communication, sharing food with their neighbors, just to make a good relationship. And as I said, Shepparton, I noticed that it's really very close with each other. I don't want to be very optimistic, and I want to say there is nothing or we didn't face. Until now, and I'm facing a lot of situation. Some people, they faced some situation, and some people, they told me we need to go back. In each community, there is a good and there is a bad. And I'm not expecting everyone will expect me. I'm not asking everyone to do that. But as much as I can, I will give these people enough space and enough time to accept me as I am and what I am.
Anthony, in your research on both the Mildura and Shepparton, how important was the idea of a sense of permanence? So we've heard from Julian, from Kon and from Fatima about how these communities have been here a long time now, and obviously people are choosing to stay. It's not just the jumping off point to go to the big city. Obviously some people do that, but there's a sense of permanence here that remains strong.
I think that there is movement, though. I mean, there are people coming and going, but there are communities that are establishing themselves and becoming significantly big communities in both Shepparton and Mildura, like from Iraqi backgrounds, from Afghani backgrounds, from various backgrounds from African countries. And I think that as those communities grow, and people will move in and out, but there is a sense that they are, getting established and that they belong to some extent. I mean, obviously as you were saying, Fatima, you've encountered incidents and all sorts of things that have happened. But I think, and obviously those communities are attractors too. Like it is, people know that there are communities there, established communities, and feel like it could be a place to go. And I think another point is interesting that Fatima raised before about when you come from a refugee or background, trying to re-establish yourself in a smaller place where you can start to find your way in to broader Australian society is an important thing. And sometimes Shepparton and Mildura have been like that for people.
Can I ask about some of the social aspects to it, Julie? I mean, for instance, traditionally in regional towns, a bit like in suburban communities as well, sports clubs, for instance, are hugely important in terms of integrating people from different walks of life to a shared experience and getting to know one another. Where do these diverse communities in Shepparton come together to get to know one another, if not just at work?
Oh, football is big here, isn't it? Netball, and you've got a hockey, and is it a soccer field being built as well? Sport is a fantastic icebreaker for community groups and for a whole community in general. If I look at the Aboriginal Rumballara football and netball team, their philosophy is that it's connecting back to Kamaraganja, which also gives those that are coming, the younger ones, a connection back to their history, but also their ancestors as well. The whole philosophy is wonderful. It's all based on kinship, history, and land and country, but also it's about empowering the younger ones to come there and, they're all very good sports people, of course, with football. And the girls are fantastic netballers, but it's a great community initiative. And you know what they do there? They have so many community programs I've noticed, like for homework, for, mentors and so forth. And this is what community needs.
So it's a hub, the people,
it's
a resource.
A definite hub, yeah.
Kon, for young first arrivals, being able to have access to somewhere like that surely must be vital.
Yeah, it's critical. At the ASRC, we are like a home of hope, a home of welcome. And at the one place, we have everything from soccer teams to drop-in centres to music groups to English classes to education, employment and health. The great challenges for young people seeking asylum right now, however, is that our government, our federal government, is setting them up to fail. Like, we work with thousands of people who are forbidden from working, forbidden from studying, forbidden from doing volunteer work, or living in a community with no income. And even when found to be refugees, are given 3-year or 5-year temporary visas. We know what you need to successfully settle as a new Australian. You need a welcoming community, you need opportunity, you need a safety net, you need values-led leadership that says that you are welcomed here, that you are safe here, and you can call this country home. And what's so difficult is we work in a space every day at the ASRC where our government is trying to set people up to fail, to dismantle their hope and well-being, to actually destroy their communities and break them so that they give up and go back to harm's way. And that's the great challenge. We know what works. That's what's so appalling about what's happening to our newest Australians is that you have policy that's trying to engineer failed social outcomes and to create a community that is broken and a burden, to be able to feed a narrative of fear rather than to focus on leadership's about saying we are one people with shared values, with our differences that we can celebrate. There is no threat here. Threat is bigotry and fear and the politics of racism. As a community, it's love that binds us, and it's community and connection and a sense of belonging. We all love family and community and our country. And that's the story. And that's the recipe to success.
Well, do we need to get better at telling that story and fight that dominant narrative, which is, fear is easier to sell than hope?
Yeah. One of the things I've done, I've just spent, in 8 weeks, I've just gone and done 41 talks across the country. And all my conversations are around this, about we need to lead with our shared values. We need to be telling our stories. We need to know our stories as well, as in our story is their story. The stories of our newest Australians are the stories of so many of us, as in we come from people who crossed sea and land, who when they came here were spoken of as a burden. I mean, we're also needing to keep telling the story of the fact that we make First Nations people refugees in their own country through the continued inequality that happens. We need to be telling these positive stories, and we need to stop defending what we are not, and we need to be focusing on telling the stories of who we are.
Well, Julie, you're in the business of sharing the story of the people, the first Australians that were here. I mean, through the work that you do, you invite people onto the country and as students to learn and study. Tell us how that works and what the outcomes are for the people who undertake your course that you've seen.
It's a popular course. It's a week-long intensive subject where the students are from Mildura, Albury-Wodonga, Bendigo, Melbourne and Shepparton, and we start off here in Shepparton, and the students get to visit all the Aboriginal community organisations. They talk to the elders, they talk to the community, but they're actually learning about why all the Aboriginal organisations are set up here and why and how. And they get a real sense of the history of Aboriginal people and the struggles. We then go over to Barma, to the Moira and Barma National Forest, and there it's about applying the academic knowledge with the Aboriginal knowledge and understanding Aboriginal knowledge because a lot of the students read about Aboriginal issues in their academic papers, but they can't really understand it unless they talk to an Aboriginal person, engage with an elder, or go out on country, see the archaeological sites, talk to people about what it's like to live on Kumragunja and with diabetes and heart problems and not be able to get to a hospital in time. How, I believe, just on the border, it's remote health delivery for Aboriginal people. And what it's like to live on the border between New South Wales and Victoria. What are the changes that Aboriginal people have to do and live under when they're crossing over? It's quite an interesting time for the students. We have Muslim students coming in now to the course, very interested because they're engaging with a lot of Aboriginal youth here in Shepparton, so they're getting on board. The young ones always connect. That's the best thing about our Australia, is we might be here sitting about this, talking about it today, but the young people are out there doing something totally different and connecting to each other right now as we're sitting here. It's either on Facebook or it's in, passing each other in the street or even in the school, So that's our strength, is our youth.
And you must see people come through the course who then acquire that knowledge and then apply it in amazing ways as they get older and move into their professional lives.
Yes, they do. It is a third-year subject, so it's a subject that's preparing students to go into a career path. So it's actually teaching them about how to handle a situation in the workplace when the discussion is about Aboriginal Australia or Aboriginal issues. Teaching them not to feel shy, ashamed and clam up and to, actually help change people's views. Don't be scared to speak about the issue or challenge someone because, not challenging someone just makes them feel like what they've done is right. But in actual fact, it's, it's crushing to an Aboriginal youth or a person or someone who's young or even in the workplace or whatever. That's where, the damage can be done. So this subject is helping non-Aboriginal people to understand, and I've heard the students so many times saying it's not going to happen around me.
It's not going to happen around me.
Yeah, racism. People, when they hear the stories of Aboriginal people having to physically defend themselves at school and, against people because they've been called names, and, the stories that they hear from the elders to the, to the youth, it really makes them understand how disempowered Aboriginal people are, how we're still on the fringe of society, and they really do want to make a difference to help people advance.
The power of sharing stories like that, Fatima, the experience of people, say, from Iraq, like yourself, who came, being able to share those stories to give people an understanding of the incredibly difficult journey you've had to make to get here, and then maybe get an understanding of the challenges you face. Is there a forum for people in this community and other communities to do that, to do, as Julie said, give other people an understanding of what it is you've been through, and then understand what it means to, not let it happen, as Julie says, when people encounter it?
The first arrival for Iraqi people, that was in 1993. So it's about 24 years.
Yeah.
24 years, it's long time. I remember at the beginning, we've been asking to talk about our stories, sharing our stories a lot. And I can say, like, according to what he said, that we are sharing our stories maybe twice or 3 times a week, just to give people more understanding about, what we faced or how we came here. And actually, we don't have this program anymore now. I believe a lot of people, they are getting, and again, I'm talking about Shepparton, they are getting more understanding about, Iraqi community or Arabic community, how we came here and how we suffered and what kind of problems, why we came to Australia. I believe they are getting more understanding.
Let me be practical for a moment. If the economics change and there's a downturn and jobs are hard to find, is that social cohesion gone with it, Anthony?
I think obviously economics is huge and it's fundamental, and we know that when there's higher levels of unemployment and things like that, people turn against immigration at an Australia-wide level. They've tracked that in statisticians have tracked that sort of trend in public opinion. So you would imagine that similarly in Shepparton, that there would be effects like that. I mean, you would just hope that there is some sort of inoculation against some of the more negative stereotyping and thinking through...
So some built-in resilience within community?
Yeah, and through... and I think that more and more opportunities for people to mix and to experience each other are really important in all places. But, in Shepparton, it's still... that's needed, I think. Like examples like, film nights where refugee stories are told and so on, and where food is brought in and people see each other. And, they can be quite sort of life-changing events for people. They hear things that they never realised, I think. And I think more opportunities, like what you're talking about, Julie, those kind of subjects, I think if we can find ways to do more of that, I think that would keep building resilience.
But institutional trust is key too, isn't it? I mean, institutional trust. It's fascinating to watch the discussion in the United States at the moment on safe haven communities and the reasons why they're important. And it's not just a moral decision to protect refugees in safe haven communities in cities that won't send back or won't allow the immigration authorities in the United States to arrest them. It's also a very practical approach to policing, in that Kon, if you make communities with a large number of undocumented migrants under siege, they're not going to talk to police, they're not going to trust that level of trust that might have been built up for 20 years disappears. So it's self-interest that governs safe haven communities as much as a sense of moral purpose. So my question is, how hard and how important is it to build that trust in a practical sense between your rivals and minority communities to the dominant culture so that they feel like they can trust authorities like the police or Centrelink or any of those organisations?
I think it's really significant. I think one of the great challenges is the way in which we weaponise the bodies and experiences of people of colour, of Indigenous people, of refugees in this country. I'll give you a statistic. Sudanese refugee young men are less likely to commit a criminal offence in Australia than an Australian-born young man. But who do you see on the news? You just need one. We are constantly showing stories, whether it's a young Sudanese refugee or a young Indigenous boy, we are constantly showing those stories. And one of the real great problems is we're criminalising communities that, in fact, while they have their challenges and crime like any other community, are actually less likely to break the law, are actually more law-abiding. And these are communities that are terrified of institutions of power. Like, I've worked with thousands of Iraqi refugees where their experiences of the police, their experiences of the military are, these are the people coming to torture you and persecute you. But what's really interesting is we find the fire department, the ambulance service, the police, when it comes to working with people seeking asylum, far more progressive than Peter Dutton. As in, when you talk to the police, they understand that the pillars of law enforcement are actually employment, education, social inclusion, health and well-being, and a culture of trust. And they actually are committed to that. Not perfect, there's major racism issues still in the police force, but we also find some genuine champions where they get it. They actually get the law enforcement's not about criminalising like we're seeing happening in the space of people seeking asylum or trying to send to jail whistleblowers. They actually see the keys to a peaceful society are when everyone has opportunity and everyone can participate and everyone is seen as valuable and worthwhile. You know what? You know what happens? Communities thrive. People thrive. It's not bloody complicated. It's actually not complicated. You treat people well and they're proud of themselves and they're feeling healthy and strong. And what happens? They contribute back to their community. But we need to be having honest conversations about when that's not happening. We need to stop individualising and blaming the victims of inequality. It's not that they don't have some agency in that, but we need to stop and go, when young people are falling through the cracks, we need to be sitting and going, are we failing them? And what messages are we sending, especially to our young men, around their own self-esteem and self-worth in this country, especially young men of colour?
Well, Julie, I was going to invite you in at that point because traditionally lots of Indigenous communities around the country have had that breakdown in trust or no trust at all in the institutions that have been imposed on them to govern them. So how has that worked in Shepparton? Have you been able to build more bridges towards a greater inclusion, a greater sense of empowerment?
Well, I don't really work on that level here as an educator, but as a researcher I can see that the policy framework for Aboriginal organisations are all very structured around social cohesion and working with the local government and whatever institutions that are here that are important to the community, like La Trobe or Melbourne Uni or, you know, all those kind of areas. But I just wanted to pick up on your point on that. You know, we used to have reconciliation action plans. Now, you know, the trend is, well, I hear voices that the Aboriginal community would prefer an inclusion plan because that would encourage people to look at including them in their organisation for employment, for promotions, all that kind of thing. And that makes a lot more sense to me. I mean, reconciliation is like 10, 15 years ago. Then we got to move on and do something else that fits the community today. So, you know, I think an inclusion plan is much better and it gives people the space to work from, you know, to be able to, you know, do something to make a difference.
Fatima, can I ask you about the sort of things that Kon and Julie were talking about in terms of trust within communities that have experienced the institutional violence of government and police and military, that how do you build a belief or a faith in new communities that they can trust the same sorts of institutions in their new home?
Well, I will give you it's really story happened to us. It's about maybe last month. 2 Muslim girls, they left supermarket with 4, trolleys, and they didn't pay the money. And I found their photos at the police Facebook. It's normal for anyone who've done something incorrect. They have to put the photos at the Facebook. And actually, I received 100 phone calls from my community. Fatima, did you see these photos? Fatima, did you do something? Have you done something? Okay, I check it, I found it, they've done something wrong, and then I called the police. I talked to one of the multicultural officer actually, and women, they've been frightened actually to go for the supermarket because this story. Some girls, they didn't go to school on the same day because they are not expected what the reaction from the other to them. Some of them, they just heard very bad words and they decided to go back home. So I talked with one of the police officer, and actually I told her, I'm not asking you to spoil us. I'm not asking seriously to treat us especially. They've done something wrong. They have to pay the cost what they've done. If you need to take them to the jail, I don't mind. If you need to take them to the court, I don't mind. But the problem, please don't put their photos because they reflect. They are not saying X or Y, they will say Muslim girls. So that will be reflect on all Muslim girls and women who they are in this area. So they understand me and they remove it straight away. At the same minute while I was talking with her, she done a phone call and this is the trust that we built it between us and the police. Actually, they are getting more understanding and they apologize from me, honestly, because what happened.
I think we're going to go to the floor very soon and take your questions, and Zoe and Sally both have microphones to do that. I just want to, before we do, ask a question, Anthony. We've talked a lot about the things that have worked here, and obviously there remain enormous challenges within communities. No community is ever perfect, and it never stands still, it's always changing. But if we can draw anything that we could take to other communities and say, well, this has worked in Shepparton, here are some goals, and I'll ask each of you to answer this, but I'll start with you, Anthony. What are some of the things that you could say, okay, here's what Shepparton have done, why don't you try this?
I think that more and more I think about it, the more and more I think leadership is really vital, and at all sorts of different levels, and that includes, I would add about the police, that the police here did have a local champion of a superintendent who was very much committed to the newer groups arriving in Shepparton, and felt that, and really fought hard to get a multicultural officer, which he got. And I think that obviously he's done a fantastic job in Shepparton and has been really important, as well as a lot of other police. So leadership at the level of all sorts of different agencies in communities, and also things like the local media in terms of presenting positive images are really important in terms of combating those kind of much more negative things that have occurred in the tabloid media, and they can be a kind of counter to that.
Fatima, what would you say if you were to advise just one other community elsewhere that's looking to try to achieve similar outcomes to what you have in Shepparton?
Well, from my experience, actually, the best thing that it's really very successful in Shepparton, the festivals. A lot of festivals that we are running here, it's really reduce the gap and building a bridge seriously between the different culture and get more understanding. And I believe this is one of the things that make community here in Shepparton is really very successful. And we've got very common says. For me, I'm saying the social cohesion always, I'm saying it's like, it's one body. We should feel we are one body. If you get hurt in your finger, the rest of the body will feel it. So I believe Shepparton is like that now.
Julie, from your experience growing up here and now...
I see the Aboriginal community here getting stronger and stronger with their culture. Their language revival is just, amazing. Their cultural knowledge, the connection to the Murray River, it's just growing stronger and stronger every day, and every generation is going to keep, growing it more and more strong.
Kon?
I think what I've heard tonight is you've got local champions from local council to universities to police force to local government at all levels to the school system. So you've got a culture of welcome, you've got champions, you've got spaces for people to come together to celebrate diversity and build on that. And then you also have brilliant local champions like Julie and Fatima as examples of that, around people who are leaders and experts actually able to educate and bring people along and into communities. There's some of the key things I think I'm seeing.
And it's important, as an outsider to say, you've got a reputation too. I mean, people elsewhere know Shepparton as the place where this diversity, the strength, the vibrancy of it is really strong. And there's a lot of people living in communities who are probably envious of that as well. So they want to know, they do want to know.
But that's also our story more generally.
Yeah.
Like Melbourne is the most livable city in the world, and 46.9% of Melbourne was born overseas or a parent was. That's actually our national story. There are issues and challenges at all levels, but our national story is actually the most successful multicultural country on earth, with lots of challenges and issues that we've talked about tonight. But that's actually our story, and we actually need to be hearing that story and sharing that story more, as well as ensuring equality and justice in all the ways we've spoken about tonight.
So,
Sorry, as you said, Shepparton reputation, it is correct. And now in the last 2 months, actually, we are having about 14 Iraqi families. They moved from Sydney, come to Shepparton because of the reputation. And they are non-Muslim, they are not Christian, they've got their own beliefs. They are a very small group. They decided to establish their life here in Shepparton because of Shepparton reputation.
there you go. It's a living example of what we're talking about. We've got a wonderful panel here for you to talk to. The way we like to conduct our Q&A is with questions rather than statements. So if you, Sally here, just put your hand up, identify yourself and direct your question to one of our panellists, and we're more than happy to take some questions from the floor. Someone's got to be brave and go first though. It's like an auction. I think there's a question right up the back row for you. We'll go up there and take your question from up there first.
Hi there. My name is Sanubar, and I have met Kon K, I think 2 years ago at the University of Melbourne when I was studying my master's in public health. So ever since I migrated to the region, and I've been trying to do a lot of volunteer work around GV Health and in Kyabram as well. So my question is directed towards Madam Fatima, and I just want to ask you that what is the right place for me to integrate into the Shepparton society? Something like the kind of platform that we have today, where every section of the society is represented. So can you please help me to know which is a good starting point for me?
A good starting point.
I didn't hear it, sorry.
So you wanted to know, what's a good starting point within the Shepparton community to start to feel like you're integrating into the wider community? Did I get that right? Is it? Yeah.
That is directly in relation to the kind of community work that is going on, where we had feedback from the different, like Kon is there from Asylum Seekers, and so the Aboriginal representatives and everyone else. I don't see any one such organization here that kind of amalgamates all these things together. I don't know about any one such organization, so can you please recommend some to me?
The other part about organization, sorry?
Just like an umbrella organisation of sorts, that looking for like an umbrella organisation that might allow someone to get a sense of being integrated into the wider community.
Well, I will say the organization that I'm working with, which is Uniting. With all my respect, you say Kildonan, but our new name, it's called Uniting. We are providing a lot of support and any kind of information you are looking for and any kind of help you are looking for to integrate with the community by doing a lot of activities or inviting you for another activities, or just to make, as I said before, my job from the beginning, just reduce the gap between the new culture and the other culture. And as well as I like a feedback I've got it from a Syrian, a very new arrival. And she said the first thing they teach me when I was at the refugee center in Lebanon, they told me to be honest. The most important to get a good life in Australia, you should be very honest. And she just been here 2 or 3 weeks. So this is the most important, to get more understanding. And I will not get any question if I've been asked from another side that's try to abuse me. Or some people, they want to get more understanding. They want to get very close to you. I will give them this space, and I will let them know to understand me, and then I will understand them too.
Do we have some more questions from the floor?
Good evening. My name's Maureen. Kon, you said earlier that immigrants and refugees and that who, did you say, haven't been accepted as set up for failure. You said something about them not being able to do volunteer work. How is that possible?
I was trying to explain that my organisation, the ASRC, we work primarily with people who have come by sea. So they've come from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Palestine, to Australia. The government has left these people in limbo for more than 4 years, forbidding them from even being able to apply for asylum. They finally were allowed to, but only after pretty much stripping away most of their legal protections and appeal rights. Those that are not accepted at the early stages and find themselves before our courts have their right to work taken from them, including their right to volunteer, as well as any income support or access to a safety net.
So can I just ask, do you feel that that is in order to completely isolate them? So they're volunteering, they have no community?
Of course. So the idea of not even letting you volunteer is the idea that you become invisible, and that you get broken, and that you basically... We spend half our time just trying to keep people from that group from actually just taking their lives or losing all hope, because they are so desperate to work. They're so desperate to contribute. They come from cultures where there's no such thing as charities. They are so desperate to put food on the table and make this country proud. They're so grateful for being here.
What are the consequences for an organisation that allows somebody with that status to volunteer?
If someone's caught volunteering when they have no work rights, they could be locked up indefinitely in detention, in immigration prison. That's where we are in 2017. That's where we are right now. And recently you would have maybe heard about Peter Dutton has been trying to force the 116 children and women and men from Manus and Nauru to go back. And the way he's been trying to do that is by cutting them off their income, kicking them out of their accommodation, and allowing them to work, but hoping that they'll starve on the streets of Melbourne, for example, so that they go back to danger on Nauru and Manus. That's what I'm talking about when we approach refugees not as how do we protect and see the potential and see it as an opportunity, but rather how do we punish and demonise and politicise. These are the outcomes that we get. We have two very clear pathways. One is a pathway of success and inclusion, Australia at its best, this beautiful great country we are, and one is Australia at its worst. And that's where we are at the moment. We're at a crossroads.
I think we have a question up here with Sally.
Thank you, Andrew from Refugee Talent. I was interested in the general conversation around the institutions that are supporting refugees, asylum seekers and migrants here in Shepparton, and there seemed to be a focus on public sector organisations, the police and the government. But I'm interested in, I guess, the role that the private sector has played in the past and how it may play a part in the future.
Great question. I'll throw that to those that know. I mean...
So what the second part of the question?
Yeah, about how the private sector, how business might play a part in helping refugees and new arrivals integrate and feel part of the community?
I don't know a lot about what private businesses have done in that area. I'm much more aware of the kind of settlement services and the Ethnic Council and formerly Kildonan and Red Cross and so on. But I guess if you mean in terms of employers, or I guess they could have a really important role to play. I'm not sure how proactive they've been. Well, I mean, obviously, people from asylum seeker and refugee backgrounds are working in farming areas and on farms and so on. So there are employers involved in that, but maybe
the business world has a huge role to play. We at the ASC have a thing we call the Innovation Hub, which is a one-stop shop business hub all focused on getting people working. And we partner with people like ANZ Bank, who currently employ 11 of our people like Virgin, ESOP, all these wonderful companies. And we keep talking about, this is not about you doing an act of charity. We actually have something you need, which is adaptive, agile, resilient, entrepreneurial people who are hardworking and willing to start wherever, but also have incredible talent. We have at the ASC everything from farmers and shepherds to IVF specialists, architects, doctors, nurses, biochemists. We have such a pool of talent, and it's really about unlocking it. And we keep saying to business, we don't want people in our food banks, we want them in your boardrooms. And so there's a great opportunity there with Corporate Australia.
So it's about shifting mindset, isn't it?
Of course it is. It's about going away from a language of charity to a language of opportunity and inclusion, as in the most successful businesses are ones that are multicultural, the ones that actually recognise and value and include. You look at Qantas in terms of the way it's been quite proud in being outspoken in support of our Indigenous history and its Indigenous employment programs, as well as its stance on things like marriage equality. More and more people are looking at businesses and going, what are the values you stand for? Where is the diversity in your workplace? And do you walk your values? And that's your competitive advantage. So I often talk to business about, you can't afford to not be inclusive and diverse because you're going to be a dinosaur in 2017. And that's the language you've got to use with the world of business.
Self-interest.
Self-interest is the great equaliser.
It is a great equaliser. Have we got another question up? We do, I think.
Hello, my name is Irfan. I'm the recent permanent resident of Australia. The thing is that Peter Durden, my question especially from Kon sir, Immigration Minister is closing doors for everyone, one by one, like recently they introduced the thing for refugees, saying that they would get the temporary protection visa, we call it TPV in that way. They are left here for maybe 4, 5, 6 years. Then they get the decision, and Peter Durden now got the powers, he can overturn any decision made by any tribunal or any department. Number one question. Number second is that recently they introduced citizenship changes. I believe they are kind of trying to make a second-class citizens community. For an instance, I'm myself here for 5.5 years, and I still need to wait to get my citizenship here in Australia for 4 more years, according to the new laws, which has not been approved yet. But a lot of other people, a lot of people here around, they can't speak English very well. They have one of the conditions that you need to speak university level English to pass that, to go to that citizenship level thing. So how do you see the future of refugees and immigrants here in Australia in next couple of years?
So if it's becoming harder and harder to become a citizen...
I'll speak briefly on it because I've spoken a lot. Look, the citizenship laws are not going to pass. They're wildly unpopular. They're not going to pass. They're racist and unpopular. They're not going to pass. These temporary visas, so if you've come by sea, the best you can get is a 3 or 5 year temporary visa with no pathway to permanency. One of the cruelest things you can do to people found to be refugees that can't call Australia home and can't bring their families, which is the other crushing part of it. If there is a change of government, the one thing, because there's bipartisanship on this awful cruelty towards refugees, if there is a change of government, they will scrap these temporary visas. I remain hopeful and optimistic. When we see what is not right and what is not just, our challenge is to go, well, how do we change it? And how do we build a better community? And that leadership, when it's lacking up there, well, it's going to come from us, upwards. And everywhere I go, across Australia, we may be a minority, but we are a minority of millions in this country that actually want a just and inclusive Australia for all. And we need to keep nurturing and focusing on that. We need to talk about what's unfair, but we need to not allow it to paralyse our moral imagination and fatigue our compassion. We need to keep going back to, well, let's build together, let's build alliances together, let's keep building communities together. We will win in the end. History is on our side. Eventually, justice is on our side, and what is morally right is on our side. So we've got to constantly keep focusing on, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to change this?
Do we also have to identify the mutual struggle in other communities. So the things you're talking about are still very relevant to Indigenous communities.
I'd love to hear Julie speak.
Yeah, we're trying to change the Australian Day, change the date, and that's all about citizenship there.
Yeah.
I mean, that to us is an insult. That's when we were colonised, we lost our land. And, when we're talking, why are we asking for an inclusion policy now? 2017, we're still not included in the Australian society, and we're the, traditional owners. We're the first peoples. And what are our youth? And I've grown up watching. I come from a politically active family with a lot of women that were marching the streets in Canberra, and had all of us with them. But they did that for us, my generation, and now I'm working towards the next generation and so forth. But like an inclusion policy for them, it doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, it's changing the date does, because it gives us a bit of pride. But it's a day of sorrow for us, Australia Day. That's when, we lost our land.
Connie, sorry, you did mention about the new changing with the citizenship test. Actually, I've been helping a group of people who they've been in Australia like you 5 years, and they are doing or studying the citizenship course, which is helping them to get more understanding. And most of them, their English language is really very limited. But I believe, maybe I'm wrong, I believe they will work with it, because I've got a lady, she applied for citizenship test, and the response she gets from department, anyone applied after 30th of April this year, they are not able to do the old test.
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
Very quickly, Fatima's right, very quickly, the new citizenship test is trying to require that you have university level English to actually get your citizenship. Yes. Something half of all Australian males wouldn't pass.
Half?
Now, probably three-quarters, probably 90% of the people I'll be having beers with at the grand final will not pass it. Now, what I'm saying is at the moment the government has tried to enact this this actually requires legislative laws, this actually requires legislative change. They do not have the numbers. This will not pass. I understand they're doing this, they're freezing people, it's profoundly distressing to people, but it will not pass. There's no way something so unpopular and so much that attacks the core of our multiculturalism, it will not pass. So this will pass. I believe this is temporary.
We have another question, I think, and then we'll come to you, Sue, in a sec.
Sorry, I promise this will be my last question. But to the whole panel, do we think that one of the reasons places like Melbourne are not as accepting is because they, in some part, isolate themselves to their own cultural community? I mean, we have places like Chinatown, and Footscray once upon a time was very Italian, and now it's very Asian. But here in Shepparton, we don't have these cultures isolating themselves so much. Do not get me wrong, I know a lot of it came from prejudice, and they wanted to feel safe and that kind of thing in the community, and everyone has the right to that. It's an expectation, and it should just be what you expect to be, and treat each other with respect, and hopefully, if you're not treated with respect, at least you'll be treated with civility. But I just wonder if it's because, not so much that we're welcoming...
Can I address that as somebody who lives in Melbourne? I think there's a whole range of interesting issues there. You talk about those traditional communities of first arrival, and not dissimilar to what they might be here. But Melbourne's problem often also is a wider problem about city infrastructure. And there are communities, and it's not just first arrival communities, but there are communities that now live in suburbs that are not serviced by public transport, don't have community assets like football grounds and the sort of things we're talking about here, are isolated physically from one another, are settled in communities where jobs are difficult to get, and they have to travel long distances. So I think Melbourne's, can I defend Melbourne, is a wonderfully strong and culturally diverse community that celebrates diversity, but it faces huge structural challenges challenges in integrating communities in general, not just around race, culture and identity, Kon. I mean, you would see this in Dandenong, and I mean, I do a lot of volunteer work in my old neighbourhood in Broadmeadows at Roxburgh Park in schools there, and I see these things, and they to me are structural issues rather than necessarily cultural choices.
What do you think, Julie? I've spoken enough.
I threw it at me like that. But I was thinking when I was listening to you all talk, a lot of our Aboriginal people have always developed and led the way with regards to developing policy and initiatives to advance our people. No one told us to. It's all, we know our community, we know what our problems are, and we know what we need. So we developed these fantastic community initiatives around our communities, and a lot of other community groups take it on, you know, and adapt it as well, because they can see the sense of what we're doing. And the reason we've had to do that is because the government doesn't do it for us, you know. We've had to do it ourselves. We've had to address our problems ourselves, and we never ever get recognised for that. So, you know, we have men's programs, women's programs, youth programs, you know, to develop our own football and netball club, you know, on our own, those kind of initiatives. And everything's based on our history, our cultural ways, our connection to country and our family history to teach the youth coming forward. They're never going to lose their connection to their family and their history. And it's all, you know, I think that's an amazing strategy that we have done as a community, and I think here in Shepparton it speaks for itself that, you know, what we've been able to achieve. We haven't achieved everything and fixed everything up yet, but we got the infrastructure, and that's what's important.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Thank you. Marshall Richards, a question to both Julie and to Kon. Do you think that the 1st of January would be the best date to replace Australia Day? The 1st of January, of course, 2001 was when Australia combined to become the Commonwealth of Australia. The holiday can be added to the Christmas break. What do you think about that date as to replace it, or do you have a better date?
There'll be a big New Year's Eve party. I don't know. I mean, you know, I guess any, you know, day would be good. I guess rather than 26th of January, I think the younger generation are now supporting all, you know, the changing the date because they want to support their, you know, their Aboriginal community. And we can't participate. No. We're excluded from participating and celebrating Australia Day. We can't. I mean, that's when all, you know, people died in our community. We've lost a lot. So, yeah, 1st of January would be good. I mean, you could start at Christmas and keep going. And then,
we'll get you to plan it for us, Julie. I think you've already got it ticking over. We've got time for one more question down the front, I think, and then I think we've hit the final whistle.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm Andrew Fairley from the Fairley Foundation. I wanted to ask a question of the panel in relation to the role of philanthropy. We've had a discussion about the role of business. There are many, many millions of dollars come in to the Shepparton region each year from philanthropy, and I want to get a sense of whether or not you believe those funds are well spent and how could they be spent better.
So from a philanthropic point of view, in terms of the goodwill of people delivering resources.
Can I just say something there? I mean, because I've been harping on about leadership, and I think that some of those kind of leadership programs that I know Fairley Foundation has run, but also some of the smaller scale leadership groups have been really important in terms of creating connections between people, and particularly for people from disadvantaged backgrounds and from newer migrant backgrounds. So I think some more sort of stable funding for those sorts of leadership programs would be really good, because I think they do, like they have an effect that sort of spins out, and they help people get a foothold and families and so on. So, yeah, that's one thing.
I would add, look, with philanthropy, on the one hand, philanthropy in the refugee space has been one of the great positive shapers, influencers and leaders. But I think philanthropy has a way to go compared to North America. I think philanthropy needs to be more visionary. It needs to have more long-term investment. It needs reporting requirements to scale appropriately, as in you can't expect the same of a little grassroots organisation as you can of a multi-million-dollar organisation. And it needs to be willing to invest more in significant innovation, especially in advocacy and policy change. And I think philanthropy is too cautious in Australia, in that it's not investing enough in actually creating systemic change for communities. It's doing a wonderful role, but it needs to be less risk averse, and it needs to be a bit more fearless, and it needs to invest in longer term guaranteed funding for organisations, rather than, well, in a year's time you need to be sustainable. The reality is that's not what's going to happen for most organisations, especially as government steps away and defunds that. And remember, advocacy is actually called evidence-based practice based on best experience that tries to then be a voice to inform government around how you create infrastructure investment and social change to create thriving communities. So there's a massive role for philanthropy that it's not grasping at the moment.
So much achieved, but so much still to be done. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for participating. Thank you for coming. Thank you to La Trobe for once again running a fantastic Bold Thinking Series event. And can you please thank our panellists for being involved? Anthony, Fatima, Julie and Kon. And thank you for being here tonight. And now there'll be a 1,000-word lecture on, essay that you all have to write and hand into Kon on the Monday. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.